So yeah, today I will present how to leverage Microsoft Search inside your Docusaurus documentation. So can you all see my screen, just to be sure?
Yeah, you're
Okay,
presenting
perfect.
clearly.
Perfect. So first of all, what is Docusaurus? For those who don't know, this is a static website generator allowing you to create content in Markdown format. It's built by Meta, Facebook actually, and it's using React behind the scenes, and it's usually used for building internal documentation. At least in my case, I use that for my internal documentation for my company project, and it allows basically to manage your documentation alongside your source code. Like instead of relying on, let's say, SharePoint pages or Word documents, for instance. So you have all in the same place, and your documentation is managed just like your code. So that's basically the purpose of Docusaurus. By default, so this solution comes with a default search engine, which is provided by Algolia, which is a third-party tool. But to get it work, you have to build your solution. Actually, your documentation needs to be like publicly available. So for instance, we are using this capability in the Modern Search Component website itself. So you can see on the top right there is a search capability. And this one is provided by Algolia. So it works because this site is publicly available. And so it's crawled by the search engine, and we have search results like this. But what if you create a documentation internally and you want to provide that search capability? Because usually when you build internal stuff, they are not available publicly, so you can't benefit from that feature. So what we're going to do today is it's going through from this to this. So a custom website and a custom custom search a box here with Microsoft Search. So the goal is to index your Docusaurus site, internal Docusaurus site with Microsoft Search, and provide a search experience directly in that site. So that's the goal basically for the presentation today. So the first, let's say, the first steps you will need to do. So how to do that, if I go on the code directly, actually. So to scaffold a new Docusaurus project is quite easy. I won't go through those steps here because it's well documented on their site. So basically, you start a command that will scaffold your solution. By the way, I'm using a sample solution from the PnP Modern Search repository. I should have started with that, actually. So the PnP Modern Search component, for those who don't know, these are different from PnP Modern Search web parts, and these components allow to basically use Microsoft Search from any web-based application. So it means any HTML page, Teams application, SharePoint web parts, and all of that. So by default, the solution provides some already pre-built integration, like SharePoint Framework web parts and Teams application, and also samples like the Docusaurus one I will show you today, and also standalone web component that can be consumed either by adding a script tag in your HTML page or by using the npm package. But I will go through all of that in the demo. So going back to the Docusaurus site, so first things to do is to create a new Docusaurus project. So using the provided npm command, so it will scaffold your basically your project structure. Oh, sorry, not there. So basically, yeah, this one, basically Docusaurus, blah, 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 and a docs folder allowing you to create content in Markdown. So it's really, really easy to start by using the default command. The next step you're gonna do to integrate with search is starting by configuring your Docusaurus site and your filters. Because in Microsoft Search, you can leverage filters, refiners actually, and to use this capability in your Docusaurus site, you will leverage a feature called meta tags for your website. So in the Docusaurus config file there, you have all the site configuration listed there, and you have a special section there, which is the metadata. So those metadata, if you put there, they will apply to all your pages within your site, right? And this metadata can be leveraged by Microsoft Search as actually to be used as a filter in the end. So we define a couple of them. It's better to define them in the global configuration file directly because it will apply to all your pages, but you can also define metadata at page level. But in my case, I'm using the global configuration. So I define a couple of metadata, project name, project type, whatever. And what it means basically is this. This property will appear in the head there. So in your page, if you inspect the head section, you will see those metadata appear there. So this will be used by Microsoft Search after that for filters. So that's the first thing you need to do. Then you need to deploy your application to host your application directly. So because it's a static site generator, normally you shouldn't have to use an app service, an Azure app service or web application. You could, let's say, deploy that in a static web blob container or something like that. In our case, we want probably an authentication part on top of your documentation. So that's why in the sample provided here, I use a web application, an Azure web application, to deploy that that site because technically there is no server needed to serve this kind of solution. You just upload your artifact in the blob container. Basically, it works. But in my case, I'm using a dummy web server to serve those things. So if you go there, you will see a dummy web server and a webpack config just to serve the pages from an Azure app service. So if I go on the Azure side, I have an app service created, so a basic app service there, where I can deploy my application, my website, and I will configure the authentication part. So why we are using an app service instead of blob container is because of the authentication part, basically. Because we will use Microsoft Search, all those calls need to be like authenticated, and for that we have basically two ways to do that. The first one is to use, let's say, a client-side implementation directly within your site using, let's say, NSAL.js, for instance. So you go on your site, sign in button, you sign in, and then you can search for content, or you can use the app service EDOS feature, which is basically the authentication part there. The first way to do this, actually using the MSAL.js library, in the case of search, you can't really do that. Why? Is because the crawler, the web crawler, the Microsoft Search web crawler won't work when using that authentication type. So you need, let's say, an authentication in front to be able to get your site crawled. So that's why we are using the authentication feature from the web app there. So you need an Enter ID application to search for your content. So in my case, I registered an application in my Azure tenant and also configured the necessary permissions. So in Microsoft Search, when you index like external sources, you will need that specific permission. So external item read.all, and that's necessary to code your website. And on your app service there, you just configure your provider. So basically you add Enter ID provider and set the Enter ID application there. So it's really straightforward, the configuration there. Select your existing SPN and it will be configured by default. So it means when you hit that endpoint, so let's say if I go on a new private window, let's say, so it will hit the authentication first and you will have to log in. But this part is not handled by my code. It's really handled by the app service. Okay, so that's for the authentication part and deployment part for your website. Then the next things to do is to configure the Microsoft Search site. So your application is ready, it's deployed, it's accessible like internally, and you have an authentication on top of that. The next step is to add a new connector in Microsoft Search. So for that, you go on the Microsoft Search Admin Center and you add a new connection. In my case, actually in the case of the demo, I will use the Enterprise Website Cloud because it's a publicly available website. But in the company scenario, in enterprise scenario, you should use the on-prem connector. These are basically the same. The only difference is the on-prem connector will require you to provision an agent, a Graph Connector agent, to access your internal data sources. So this is really the difference there. But they basically work the same way. But just for the demo purpose, I will use the cloud connector. So you configure your URL there, and the cool thing about that is you can set an authentication type there, and that's why we are using the idiot feature there. So we can use a OAuth connection and put the information of the Enter ID application there. So the resource ID will be the client ID of course, the client ID, and the secret there. So normally from there, you will be able to authenticate through your site. Okay. Custom setup, it will be easier, yeah. And normally you should be able to authenticate directly to your site using the connector. Validating the connection. Okay, great. So it's authenticated, and now I can start configuring my connector. So in the content tab there, so remember the meta tags we defined in our solution. If you add a property there, you can select meta tag there. And on the meta tag, you will see normally all your meta tags defined in your Docusaurus project. So it allows you basically to configure your schema the way you want. So some property can be searchable, some of them can be refinable. It's up to you to decide, but basically you can leverage those properties directly in that connector. I won't create that connector like there because it's already created and we don't have time to index that. But basically that's the initial configuration to leverage your meta tag. So at this point, you have basically a blank Docusaurus site with authentication configured and the connector configured as well. Now it's time to see how we can integrate the PnP Modern Search component directly into the Docusaurus solution. So if I go back on my solution there, so I have my source here, and we're going to use a feature of Docusaurus that is called swizzling. The swizzling basically is just a technique to replace some existing parts of the UI. So for instance, the default search box, I want to replace that with my own search component and something like that. So Docusaurus provides some default placeholders to replace, but in our case, we will replace like 2. And the most important one is the root one. So the root one is basically the global component that will be initialized like just once during the application load, and this is where we're gonna define, let's say, our initialization code. For instance, registering the component and all of that. In the case of Docusaurus, there is special things to consider. It uses React, but React server-side and not client-side. So it means you can't import the components directly from there. For instance, if I do something like this, or the import there, it won't work because the PnP Modern Search Core components are meant to be used in the browser and not on the server. So that's why we are using a technique just there, an effect in React just to delay the import of the components so it works. But otherwise, it won't work if you put the import directly there. So what we are doing here is basically we are using the npm package, importing all the components. So we have the same as PnP Modern Search Web part. We have the same components: results, search box, filters, verticals, and all of that. And we import them so they can be used directly in Docusaurus pages. The next thing we do actually is to handle the authentication. because the authentication is not managed directly through your code, like using MSL, JS, or something like that, you need to get the authentication token coming from EasyAuth, so you can use it for your graph call, actually, to get the search results. The EasyAuth feature is pretty straightforward. To get your access token, you just have to call a couple of methods there. So for instance, the auth login, and you have also other methods to log out and also refresh your access token. In that case, you can just get your, like I said, your access token and provide that to your components. So the PnP Modern Search Core components, they are using Microsoft Graph Toolkit behind the scenes. And the way Microsoft Graph Toolkit works is you have a global provider on your page that handles authentication, and all the components are using that provider. So in that case, we create just a simple provider with the access token, so all the components can use that and use that access token if they have to make a graph call. And we set that component, that provider, like globally. That is in the case if we are behind EasyAuth feature, like a web application. In the local scenario, we are just using the MSL provider, the default one from Microsoft Graph Toolkit. So we have a signing button, and the authentication is handled, like I would say, manually. So that's for the initialization, the global initialization of the component. Then we're gonna create our search box. So we go on the search bar there component, and we consume the PnP Modern Search Core components from there. So in that case, because these are React components, I use a special library to just translate my web components into React components so I can use them in Docusaurus. So for instance, I use the PnP search inputs there, and I'll configure all my settings here. So you have multiple settings available for each component, and basically these components will appear on my page when deployed. So yeah, in my case, I redirect to a search page. So whenever I type something in the search box, I will be redirected to the search page using that specific query URL. And on my search, actually the search page itself, if I go on pages there, I have a special page search there, and the same. I'm creating those components. Actually, I wrap those components as React component there, and I create my search experience. So the search input, search filters, and all of that to have my experience there. So in the end, with this specific configuration, the result will be something like this. So if I type something in my search box there, so it's really the search bar component, redirect to the search page there, and the components are executed, and they are all connected inside the page all together. And as you can see, the authentication is performed directly. So I use the login control there. So I'm not prompt to log in. It's just like automatic. The token is retrieved, and I have the authentication is already handled for me. This is the web application scenario, but if you want to test it locally, for instance, so on the Docusaurus site, you can simply run that command, like pnpm run start. It will start the local thing to spin up the local server there, and normally you will see the difference there. Did I just stop that? Okay. Come on. Okay, perfect. And now if I go on that page, so you have the exact same motion, but the difference is because we are not actually behind the web application, you just have a sign-in button there. So that's really the how we handle the local scenario and the production scenario where your components are defined. So in sign-in is basically the same. You get an access token, and you will be able to crawl your content there. Of course, it's not configured because I didn't test that, but that's the idea basically behind this. So you can start from the existing sample on the GitHub repository there, sample Docusaurus. And you have all those steps explained. I also wrote a blog post, a complete blog post about that, all the steps and things you need to think about when configuring this. But basically, it allows you to integrate the search feature in any Docusaurus site in your company. So that's a really interesting use case.